The sound of soft piano music echoed through a grand ballroom filled with laughter, crystal chandeliers, and the quiet hum of wealth. Waiters in black suits moved gracefully between tables, serving champagne and caviar to guests who seemed to glide effortlessly through life. And then, at the far edge of that glittering room, stood a man holding a mop, his work boots dull against the polished marble floors. His name was Ethan Miller, a single father, a janitor, and the last person anyone in that room would have expected to change the night forever. The music swelled. Ethan paused for a moment, watching from the sidelines. On the dance floor, couples twirled in rhythm, their smiles wide and confident. But in one corner of the room, apart from the celebration, sat a young woman in a wheelchair dressed in soft blue satin, her eyes distant yet full of longing. Her name was Lily Sterling, the only daughter of Richard Sterling, the powerful CEO of Sterling Industries, the man who had built everything in this room. Everyone knew his story. Few knew hers. And in that moment, the two most different people in the building, the janitor and the CEO's paralyzed daughter, were about to share something that would move an entire room to tears. Before we dive into this incredible story, welcome to Swift Tale, the channel where ordinary lives become extraordinary stories. If you're visiting for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear will remind you of something beautiful, that kindness knows no status, compassion knows no class, and sometimes the smallest gesture can heal wounds that money never could. Now, let me ask you a question. Have you ever done something so small, so simple, that you didn't realize it would change someone's life forever? That's exactly what happened here. Ethan wasn't supposed to be at that ballroom. He was just covering an extra shift to afford his daughter's school trip. He had no tuxedo, no fancy words, no connections, just hard work, tired eyes, and a heart full of sincerity. His life was built on quiet sacrifices, the kind people rarely notice but always feel. Every night, after mopping the corporate floors where executives held late meetings, he'd go home to a small apartment where his daughter, Mia, waited up for him with 2 mugs of cocoa and a big smile. She was his world, his reason for everything. But on this particular night, fate had something extraordinary planned. You see, Lily Sterling hadn't danced since the accident, a crash that left her paralyzed from the waist down 2 years earlier. Once a ballerina, she now sat by the sidelines, watching others move the way she used to. Her father, Richard, buried himself in work, hiding his guilt behind boardroom walls. Everyone pitied Lily, but no one dared approach her, afraid of saying the wrong thing, of breaking her fragile silence. Everyone except Ethan. It all began with a glance. A simple, almost invisible moment where Ethan looked up from polishing the floor and met Lily's eyes. There was something there, something both of them recognized: loneliness. She was surrounded by people but completely unseen. He was seen by everyone but never noticed. And in that brief exchange, something shifted. Mia, Ethan's 10-year-old daughter, was there that night too. Her father couldn't afford a sitter, so he'd asked permission to let her sit quietly in the back while he worked. But Mia was not the kind to sit still. Her wide eyes wandered around the ballroom, mesmerized by the dresses, the music, the magic. When she noticed Lily sitting alone, she tilted her head and whispered, "Daddy, why isn't that lady dancing?" Ethan followed her gaze, hesitating. "Because sometimes people have reasons, sweetheart." "But she looks sad," Mia replied softly. "I think she needs a friend." That simple line, spoken by a child who saw beyond wealth and status, was what set everything into motion. In the coming minutes, a janitor and his daughter would unknowingly teach an entire room full of powerful people what true humanity looks like. They would remind them that joy doesn't come from privilege, it comes from connection. That compassion doesn't need a stage, it only needs a moment of courage. This story matters because it's not about charity, pity, or luck. It's about the courage to reach across invisible walls, the ones society builds between people who look, live, or earn differently, and to remind one another that we're all human. Ethan didn't ask Lily to dance because he wanted attention. He did it because he saw her heart before her circumstance. And in that single act, one hand extended, one hesitant smile accepted, something miraculous happened. Not only did Lily dance again, but her father, the CEO who had everything money could buy, found something he'd lost years ago: his humanity. So stay with us until the end, because in this story, every detail matters. You'll see how one humble man's gesture, born from love, memory, and loss, melted the walls around a powerful man's heart. And when the truth behind Ethan's request finally comes out, you'll understand why even the CEO couldn't hold back his tears. This is not just a story about a dance. It's about redemption, compassion, and the hidden power of kindness. This is Swift Tale, and this is the story of how a single dad janitor asked a CEO's paralyzed daughter to dance and revealed a truth that changed everything. Before the night of the dance, Ethan Miller's life was a rhythm of exhaustion and purpose, a steady beat of early mornings, late nights, and endless effort. He was a single father not by choice, but by the cruel turns of fate. His wife, Amelia, had passed away 5 years ago, leaving behind only memories, a gold wedding band, and their daughter, Mia, who was just 5 at the time. From that day onward, Ethan's world became smaller but heavier, his shoulders carrying the weight of 2 roles, father and mother, provider and protector. Ethan's mornings began before the sun even touched the city skyline. The alarm clock never had to ring twice. He'd wake up instinctively at 4:30. The small apartment in the older part of town was barely big enough for 2, but Ethan had turned it into a home filled with warmth and laughter. The walls were decorated with Mia's crayon drawings, crooked hearts, stick figures holding hands, and colorful suns that brightened their modest space. He'd glance at one particular drawing taped above the kitchen sink, a little girl holding her father's hand under a rainbow with the words "Me and Daddy, Forever Team" scribbled in pink marker. It reminded him why he kept going. Money was tight, painfully tight. His janitor's salary barely covered rent, groceries, and Mia's school fees, but Ethan refused to let his daughter feel the weight of their struggles. To her, life was a big adventure filled with bedtime stories, homemade pancakes, and weekend trips to the park. She didn't know that her father often skipped dinner to make sure there was enough for her. She didn't see him counting coins late at night, balancing bills at the kitchen table while whispering a quiet prayer that the electricity wouldn't be cut off again. At work, Ethan was invisible. To the executives at Sterling Industries, he was just another blue-uniformed figure who mopped the floors and emptied the trash bins. They didn't know his name, they didn't ask, but Ethan didn't mind. He found peace in the quiet hours after everyone else had gone home, the hum of fluorescent lights, the squeak of his mop, the simple satisfaction of leaving something cleaner than he found it. To him, that was a small victory in a world that rarely gave him any. Still, there were moments when loneliness crept in. Sometimes, during his night shifts, Ethan would pause by the big glass windows of the office tower, staring out at the glittering skyline. The city looked alive, full of people chasing dreams he could barely imagine. He'd wonder if Amelia could see him from wherever she was. "I'm doing my best, love," he'd whisper under his breath. "I promised I'd take care of her." Ethan's co-workers admired his work ethic but pitied his circumstances. There was Ray, an older janitor who'd been with the company for decades. He'd often pat Ethan on the back and say, "You're a good man, son. Most people would have quit long ago." Ethan would just smile. "Can't quit being a dad, Ray." On weekends, he took small handyman jobs around the neighborhood, fixing leaky faucets, painting fences, repairing old furniture. Every extra dollar went into Mia's education fund. He wanted her to have a future bigger than his own, one where she wouldn't have to struggle just to survive. But despite the hardship, their bond was unbreakable. Mia was the light that guided him through the darkest nights. She was full of life, curious, funny, endlessly kind. She had Amelia's eyes and her gift for empathy. Ethan would often find her helping their elderly neighbor carry groceries or sharing her lunch with a classmate who forgot theirs. She was her mother's daughter in every way that mattered. Still, raising her alone came with challenges. There were days when Ethan questioned whether he was enough. He wasn't always patient, and the exhaustion sometimes made him short-tempered. One evening, when Mia asked if she could join a ballet class, Ethan's heart sank. He wanted to say yes, desperately, but the cost was more than he could afford. He told her they'd think about it. But that night, as he mopped the marble floors of the Sterling headquarters, he couldn't stop thinking about how much she resembled the little ballerinas in the posters outside the company's grand ballroom. Ironically, Sterling Industries, the company whose CEO lived in luxury, became the backdrop of Ethan's daily fight for survival. He'd clean the same conference rooms where deals worth millions were signed, while quietly worrying about affording groceries. He'd sweep the same hallways where executives in suits discussed expanding profits, while silently calculating bus fare. Yet, through it all, he never complained. He believed that dignity wasn't about how much money you made. It was about how you carried yourself when no one was watching. There was one particular night that stood out before the grand event. Ethan had just finished his shift when he overheard two executives chatting near the elevators. "The CEO's hosting a charity gala this weekend," one said. "Should be huge, big names, media, everything." Ethan had paused for a second, thinking nothing of it, until the man added, "Poor Lily, I hear she might attend. Been years since the accident." Ethan didn't know the details, but he'd heard whispers about the CEO's daughter. An accident, a promising dancer who could no longer walk. People spoke of her like a tragic figure, someone to be pitied from afar. Ethan understood that kind of quiet pain, the kind that never left, only changed shape. He didn't know it then, but that fleeting thought, that small sense of empathy, would become the bridge that connected their worlds. That Saturday, when his supervisor asked if anyone wanted to take the extra cleaning shift for the gala night, everyone declined. The event was long, the guests demanding, and the hours unpaid overtime. But Ethan raised his hand. He needed the money, yes, but also something about that night felt important, though he couldn't explain why. As he clocked in for the shift, dressed in his neatly pressed uniform and worn boots, Mia tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, can I come too? I'll be super quiet." Ethan hesitated. Bringing her wasn't allowed, but it was either that or leave her alone at home. He thought of her bright eyes, her eagerness to see where Daddy worked, and sighed. "Okay, Peanut, but you stay close to me, all right? No wandering." She nodded, grinning ear to ear. "Promise." And that's how it began. A tired janitor and his curious little girl stepped into a world of chandeliers, laughter, and champagne glasses, a world they didn't belong to. But what neither of them knew was that by the end of the night, they wouldn't just belong there, they would change it forever. That night, fate would bring Ethan face to face with the very people who looked past him every day. And among them was one soul who would finally see him not as a janitor, but as a man with a story, a heart, and a strength that even a CEO couldn't ignore. While Ethan was busy sweeping the marble floors and making sure the grand ballroom sparkled, on the top floor of Sterling Industries' private penthouse, Lily Sterling sat quietly by her window. Outside, the city shimmered under golden lights, cars moving like fireflies, the hum of life echoing far below her. But up here, in her father's glass-walled mansion, the world was still and silent. The kind of silence that didn't comfort, it suffocated. Lily had once loved nights like this. She used to press her face to that same window, waiting for her father to come home from another long day at the company. Back then, she'd run to the door the moment she heard his footsteps, her ballerina slippers tapping on the marble floors, her laughter filling every corner of their home. She was light, she was motion, she was freedom. But that was before the accident. Now the one sprite girl who danced on stage with ribbons in her hair sat in a wheelchair, her legs still and fragile beneath a velvet blanket. Her reflection on the glass looked unfamiliar, pale, distant, and burdened. 2 years had passed, but every day still felt like the day after the crash, heavy, colorless, and endless. Her father, Richard Sterling, tried to fill the void with everything money could buy. He built her a new room filled with sunlight, bought her the best doctors, the most advanced therapy equipment, and even a private nurse. But none of it could bring back what she'd lost, her movement, her independence, her identity. Lily had once lived for dance. It wasn't just a hobby, it was her soul's language. She remembered her mother sitting in the front row at every recital, clapping until her hands hurt. But her mother was gone now too, taken by an illness that had eaten away at her strength years before the accident. Losing her legs after that felt like losing the last piece of her mother's memory. Richard had buried himself in work to escape the pain. He didn't know how to talk about grief, so he drowned it in board meetings, quarterly reports, and endless phone calls. He believed success could protect them, that power could make pain irrelevant. But pain didn't care about power. It seeped through even the thickest walls. At first he visited Lily every day after therapy, but as the months passed, his visits grew shorter, his words fewer. "You'll walk again," he'd say, more to himself than to her. "We'll find a way." Then he'd disappear into the elevator, his phone already ringing. Lily never blamed him. She knew he was trying, but sometimes trying wasn't enough. Tonight, as the gala approached, her nurse, Clara, helped her prepare. "You look beautiful, Miss Sterling," Clara said softly, adjusting the delicate blue gown that flowed over Lily's chair. "Your father will be proud." Lily smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't match the smile. "It's just a dress, Clara. I'll sit in a corner while everyone else dances. Again." Clara hesitated, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't know that. Maybe tonight will be different." Lily looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. Different stopped existing a long time ago. An hour later, she was wheeled into the ballroom, a vision of grace and sadness all at once. The chandelier lights caught the soft shimmer of her dress, making her look almost ethereal. Heads turned as she entered. Guests smiled politely, whispered quietly, then turned away just as quickly, unsure of what to say. Some pitied her, others avoided her altogether, afraid of discomfort. Her father, Richard, stood near the center of the room, surrounded by investors and politicians. He was tall, confident, the kind of man who commanded attention without saying a word. When he noticed Lily arrive, he excused himself from the conversation and approached her, his smile tight and rehearsed. "Lily, sweetheart," he greeted, kneeling slightly to meet her eyes. "You look wonderful." "Thank you, Dad." Her tone was gentle but distant. "It's a beautiful event." He nodded, glancing around. "Yes, well, it's for a good cause. We're raising funds for spinal injury research. I thought you appreciate that." There it was again, that unspoken hope. He thought he could fix this, that one day, with enough money, enough science, enough effort, she'd stand again. But Lily didn't want to be fixed. She wanted to be seen. As he straightened up, his assistant called him from across the room. "Sir, the chairman from the foundation is here." "I'll be right there," Richard replied before turning back to Lily. "I'll come get you when the speeches start, all right?" She nodded, "Of course." And just like that, he was gone again, swallowed by a crowd of polished suits and glittering gowns. Lily sighed quietly and wheeled herself toward a quieter corner near the stage. She preferred being invisible. From there, she could watch without being watched. The music began, a slow, elegant waltz, and couples flooded the dance floor. Her fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair as she watched them twirl gracefully, their laughter floating like a melody. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes and imagined herself among them, spinning, laughing, her dress flowing around her like a cloud. In her mind, she could still feel the rhythm, the muscle memory of dance pulsing through her body. But when she opened her eyes, all that remained was stillness. She blinked back tears. "Not here, not tonight." That was when she noticed something unusual. A little girl, no older than 10, peeking from behind the refreshment table, her big curious eyes fixed on her. She had 2 small pigtails and wore a simple white dress. When their eyes met, the girl smiled brightly and waved. Lily blinked, taken aback. It wasn't pity, it wasn't awkwardness. It was just kindness, pure and simple. The girl whispered something to the man beside her, a janitor in a neatly pressed blue uniform, and tugged his sleeve. Lily watched as the man looked up, followed his daughter's gaze, and then froze for a moment. Their eyes met across the room. There was something in his expression, not pity, not curiosity, but understanding. He nodded gently to the little girl, who grinned, then disappeared behind him again. For the first time all evening, Lily felt her heart stir, a strange feeling of being noticed, but not as the girl in the wheelchair, just Lily. She didn't know it yet, but the man she had just locked eyes with, the humble janitor her father barely knew existed, would soon change her life in a way no doctor, no therapy, no fortune ever could. And as the orchestra played its next song, something in the air shifted, like fate had just taken its first quiet step. The night had reached its peak. The grand chandelier bathed the ballroom in golden light, laughter and clinking glasses filling the air. Couples moved elegantly across the polished floor as the orchestra played a timeless waltz. It was a scene straight from a dream, perfect, seamless, and utterly unreachable for those standing on the outside. Ethan stood near the back, mop in hand, pretending to focus on a smudge of water that wasn't really there. His little girl, Mia, sat on a chair nearby, her legs swinging and her eyes wide with wonder. She had never seen anything like this before, gowns that shimmered like stars, tuxedos that looked like they came from another world. But what held her attention most wasn't the lights or the people. It was the girl in the wheelchair sitting all alone by the far wall. "Daddy," Mia whispered, tugging his sleeve. "Why is that lady sitting by herself? Doesn't she want to dance?" Ethan followed her gaze. He saw Lily Sterling, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression calm but distant. She looked like a painting, beautiful, still, but somehow full of silent pain. "She can't, sweetheart," he replied softly. "Her legs, they don't work the way they used to." Mia frowned, her little brows furrowed in thought. "But you don't need legs to be happy, right?" Ethan's heart tightened. "No, you don't," he said, smiling faintly, "but sometimes people forget that." Mia was quiet for a moment, then her eyes lit up. "Daddy, you should dance with her." Ethan blinked. "What?" "You always say everyone deserves to feel special," she said matter-of-factly. "She looks like she forgot how that feels. Maybe if you asked her to dance, she'd remember." Ethan's first instinct was to laugh, not out of mockery, but disbelief. The room was filled with the city's richest and most powerful people. He was a janitor, standing there with a mop and a name tag. The idea of walking up to the CEO's daughter and asking her to dance seemed absurd. "Sweetheart, that's not how it works," he said gently. "Why not?" Mia tilted her head. "You told me dancing is just about feeling the music in your heart. She still has a heart, doesn't she?" Those words hit him harder than he expected. Ethan looked at his daughter, her innocence cutting through all the invisible walls adults built between themselves. He turned his gaze back to Lily, the way she watched the dancers with longing in her eyes, the way her hand twitched slightly every time the music swelled. Maybe Mia was right. Maybe it didn't matter who he was or who Lily was. Maybe, for one moment, what mattered most was kindness. He took a deep breath and set the mop aside. "Stay right here, okay?" he whispered. Mia nodded eagerly. "Go on, Daddy." Ethan smoothed down his uniform as best as he could and started walking toward Lily. Each step felt heavier than the last. He could feel the weight of eyes on him, servers, guests, even security. People whispered, unsure of what he was doing. A janitor walking across a ballroom wasn't something anyone expected. But Ethan kept walking. Lily noticed him approaching. She straightened slightly, surprised. No one else had come near her all evening, except for her father, and even that had been brief. As Ethan stopped a few feet in front of her, he hesitated, just for a second, then smiled. "Good evening," he said softly, his voice humble but warm. "You look like someone who appreciates music more than most." Lily blinked, taken aback. His tone wasn't patronizing or pitying, it was sincere. "I used to," she replied quietly. "It's been a while." Ethan nodded. "It doesn't look like it's left you." She gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "Maybe, but I'm not exactly dance floor material anymore." Ethan smiled again, gentler this time. "Maybe not for the kind of dance they're doing," he said, nodding toward the crowd. "But I was thinking of a different kind, one that doesn't need steps." Her brows furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" He took a small step closer, extended his hand, and said softly, "Would you dance with me?" For a moment, the entire world seemed to pause. The music went on, but Lily couldn't hear it. All she heard was her heart pounding in her chest. Around them, guests stopped talking, forks froze midair, and even the conductor lowered his baton slightly. She stared at his outstretched hand, the calloused, hard-working hand of a man who clearly didn't belong among the polished elite. And yet, something about his presence felt grounding, safe. "You don't have to stand," Ethan said quickly, sensing her hesitation. "We can dance right here, just move to the rhythm, no rules." Lily blinked, torn between disbelief and emotion. "You're serious?" He smiled softly, completely. For a long moment she said nothing, Then, slowly, almost trembling, she placed her hand in his. It was the first time she had danced since the accident. Ethan didn't move much, just a small, gentle sway. He stood beside her wheelchair, getting her hand as the music wrapped around them like a soft blanket. It wasn't graceful or polished, but it was real. Their movements were quiet, but full of meaning, two souls finding rhythm in stillness. And for the first time in 2 years, Lily smiled. Not the polite smile she gave her father's guests, not the practiced one she used to hide her pain. A real, genuine smile, bright and free. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "I can feel it again." Ethan nodded, his own throat tightening. "That's because you never lost it." The crowd around them was silent, stunned. Some watched with confusion, others with quiet awe. Even the orchestra softened their playing, the melody turning tender, intimate. And then, near the center of the room, a man's voice broke the silence. "Lily!" It was Richard Sterling. He stood there frozen, watching his daughter, his paralyzed daughter, moving with the janitor. At first, anger flickered across his face. Who was this man? How dare he touch her? But as he looked closer, the anger dissolved. Because for the first time in years, he saw his daughter truly alive. Her eyes sparkled, her laughter was real, and her entire face glowed with joy, something he hadn't seen since before the accident. Richard's lips parted, but no words came. The guests glanced between him and the pair dancing in the corner, unsure of what to do. The room seemed to breathe as one. When the song ended, Ethan released her hand gently and stepped back, bowing slightly. "Thank you for the dance," he said softly. Lily's eyes shimmered with tears. "No," she whispered, "thank you." He smiled, nodded respectfully, and turned to return to his post. But before he could take a single step, applause erupted, hesitant at first, then swelling into something powerful. The entire ballroom, guests, servers, even the orchestra, began clapping. Lily blushed, her heart pounding, while Ethan looked down, embarrassed. He hadn't done it for attention. He hadn't done it for praise. He'd done it because, for one moment, he wanted her to feel whole again. Across the room, Richard watched in silence, a strange heaviness filling his chest. He didn't yet understand why this man's gesture moved him so deeply, but he soon would. Because the real reason behind Ethan's courage was something no one in that room could have guessed. The sound of applause still lingered in the air long after the music stopped. Lily's cheeks glowed, her smile trembling between joy and disbelief. For the first time in years, she felt alive, not as a patient or a fragile symbol of tragedy, but as herself. Around her, people whispered softly, some wiping their eyes, others unsure what they had just witnessed. At the far end of the room, Richard Sterling stood frozen, his glass of champagne forgotten in his hand. He was a man used to control of numbers, people, outcomes. But right now, control had slipped through his fingers like sand. He couldn't take his eyes off his daughter. That smile, that light, he hadn't seen it since before the accident. "Sir," his assistant murmured beside him, "should I?" But Richard raised a hand sharply. "No," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but his heart was. He stepped forward slowly, weaving through the crowd as the applause faded. Ethan, noticing him approach, instinctively took a step back. His uniform suddenly felt too tight, his hands too rough, his boots too loud against the marble floor. He hadn't meant to draw attention, least of all from the CEO himself. He just wanted to make someone smile. "Dad," Lily said, her voice trembling slightly as Richard came closer. For a moment he didn't speak. His eyes darted from her tear-streaked face to the janitor standing beside her. The contrast was almost surreal, his daughter, dressed in silk and diamonds, and the man who cleaned the floors she rolled across. Yet, somehow, in that moment, they looked like equals. "Lily," Richard said finally, his voice softer than anyone in the room had ever heard it. You look happy." She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I am." He swallowed hard, his gaze flickering toward Ethan. "And this gentleman." Lily turned to Ethan with a gentle smile. "This is Mr. Miller. He just asked me to dance." Richard blinked. "He what?" Ethan straightened slightly, his tone respectful but steady. Sir, I hope I didn't overstep. I just thought your daughter might enjoy the music. The room fell utterly silent. Guests leaned in, pretending not to eavesdrop, but hanging on every word. The idea of a janitor addressing the CEO directly was unthinkable. But Richard wasn't angry, not. He looked at Ethan, really looked at him, for the first time. The lines on his face spoke of years of hard work, sacrifice, and fatigue. His hands, though rough and calloused, had moved with such care when holding lilies. There was something deeply human in the man's presence, something Richard hadn't felt in a long time. And that's when it hit him, a sharp pang of realization. How was it that this stranger, this janitor, could make his daughter smile when he, with all his money and resources, had failed for years? Lily reached for her father's hand. Dad, it was just a dance, but for the first time, I felt like me again. Richard knelt beside her, struggling to keep his composure. Sweetheart, his voice broke slightly, I've spent so much time trying to fix what happened that I forgot how to just be with you. Her eyes softened. You didn't forget, Dad, you just stopped seeing me. He didn't. Those words pierced him deeper than she could ever know. Around them, the crowd began to disperse, realizing this was no longer a moment for spectators. The music faded completely, leaving only the soft hum of emotion between father, daughter, and janitor. Richard turned toward Ethan again. Mr. Miller, is it? Yes, sir. You work here? Yes, sir, night janitorial staff. Been here about 4 years. Richard nodded slowly, glancing at the mop bucket in the corner. And yet tonight, you've done something I couldn't do in twice that time. He paused, his throat tightening. You gave my daughter back her smile. Ethan shifted awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't do much, sir, just asked her to dance. But that's exactly it, Richard said, his voice trembling now. You saw her when no one else did, not even me. Lily squeezed Ethan's hand, her eyes glistening. He reminded me that I don't need to stand to feel alive. For a long, quiet moment, the three of them simply existed in that shared silence. A janitor, a CEO, and the daughter who had built a bridge between their worlds. Richard finally straightened and took a deep breath. Mr. Miller, I'd like to thank you properly. Come by my office tomorrow. I owe you more than words. Ethan shook his head immediately. That's kind, sir, but you don't owe me anything. I didn't do it for thanks. Richard tilted his head. Then why did you? Ethan hesitated, his eyes distant for a moment. Because, he said finally, someone once reminded me that a single act of kindness can keep a person from giving up, even when life feels impossible. There was something in his tone, a heaviness, a story behind the words that caught Richard's attention. But before he could ask more, Ethan nodded respectfully and turned back toward his daughter, who was watching proudly from the edge of the room. Come on, Peanut, he said softly, time to go. Mia jumped up and ran to him, her little shoes clicking against the floor. Daddy, she looked so happy. She did, he said, smiling down at her, and that's all that matters. Lily watched them go, her heart full. Good night, Mr. Miller, she called. Ethan turned, gave a small nod, and replied, Good night, Miss Sterling. As they left, Richard remained standing there, staring after them. He didn't understand everything that had just happened, only that something profound had shifted inside him. He looked down at his daughter. You really felt happy? She nodded, for the first time in a long time. Richard smiled weakly. Then maybe he's right, he murmured. Maybe kindness really is the one thing that can fix what money can't. But as he glanced at the door Ethan had walked through, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man, something deeper, something unfinished. And the next morning, when Ethan arrived for work, that feeling would lead Richard to uncover a truth that would shake him to his core and make him see his own privilege, pain, and purpose in an entirely new light. Because the man who had just changed his daughter's life had once lost everything because of his company, the next morning, sunlight spilled through the glass walls of Sterling Industries, painting the marble floors in shades of gold. Employees bustled in early, clutching coffee cups and murmuring about deadlines. But the man who usually commanded the building's pulse, Richard Sterling, wasn't in his office cornering markets or firing off orders. He was waiting. Waiting for a janitor. Richard had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his daughter's face, that radiant, unfiltered smile, and the man who had brought it back. There was something about Ethan Miller that stirred a strange mix of gratitude and unease in him. He needed to understand who this man was and why he felt such an inexplicable pull toward him. When Ethan finally arrived, pushing his cart and greeting the front desk staff with a humble nod, he didn't expect to see the CEO himself standing by the reception. The staff went silent instantly, their eyes darting between the billionaire and the janitor. "Mr. Miller," Richard said evenly, "could I have a word in my office?" Ethan blinked, taken aback, but nodded politely. "Of course, sir." As they stepped into the private elevator, Ethan kept his gaze low, gripping the handle of his cleaning cart tightly. The air was thick with formality, but also curiosity. When they reached the top floor, Richard gestured toward a seat across from his desk. "Please sit." Ethan hesitated but complied. He wasn't sure why he was there, maybe to be reprimanded, maybe to be thanked again. Either way, he sat still, ready to take whatever came. Richard studied him for a moment, fingers steepled under his chin. "You've worked here 4 years, correct?" "Yes, sir." "And before that?" Ethan shifted slightly. "A few odd jobs, construction, maintenance. I've been trying to provide for my daughter after her mother passed." Richard nodded slowly, his expression softening. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you, sir." There was a pause, a long one, before Richard spoke again. "You said something last night that stuck with me, about kindness saving people who feel like giving up." He leaned forward slightly. "What did you mean by that?" Ethan's eyes flickered with old pain. "It's just something I learned the hard way, sir. Sometimes, life knocks you down so hard, you start believing you don't deserve to stand up again. But if someone, even a stranger, shows you kindness, it can remind you that maybe you still matter." Richard nodded, thoughtful. "That's a powerful thing to say." Ethan smiled faintly. "It's a powerful thing to live." Silence settled again, but it wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full of unspoken stories. Finally, Richard said, "You mentioned you've been working to provide for your daughter. You're a single father." "Yes, sir, Mia's my whole world. She's 8 now, smart. Curious, stubborn like her mom." Richard smiled faintly, but then his gaze grew distant. Something about Ethan's words, about his wife, about loss, triggered a faint tug in his memory. "Miller," he said slowly, "that name sounds familiar." Ethan's brow furrowed slightly. "Maybe coincidence, sir. Miller's a common name." "Perhaps," Richard murmured, but as soon as Ethan left, something in his gut told him there was more. He turned to his assistant, Susan. "Get me Ethan Miller's employee file and run a background check, quietly." Susan hesitated. "Of course, sir." Hours later, she returned with a thin folder. "He's clean, sir. No criminal record. Former small business owner, Miller Maintenance Solutions. Went bankrupt 6 years ago." Richard's eyebrows lifted. "Bankrupt? Why?" "Filed for liquidation after a contract dispute," Susan explained. "Apparently, his largest client pulled out suddenly. The client was," she flipped a page, "Sterling Industries." Richard froze. "What?" She nodded. "It says here your company terminated a cleaning services contract after an internal policy change. He tried to fight it, but with no capital, he lost his business. His wife's medical bills piled up soon after. She passed away 2 months later." The words hit Richard like a blow to the chest. He sat back in his chair, suddenly pale. His fingers tightened around the folder, knuckles white. Ethan Miller hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. He'd been broken by this company, his company. And yet, instead of bitterness, the man had shown nothing but humility and compassion. He'd danced with Richard's daughter. He'd given her joy. Richard pressed a hand to his forehead, his chest heavy with guilt. "My God." That night he went home early, something he rarely did. Lily noticed immediately, "Dad, you're home before dinner." He smiled faintly, sitting beside her. "Yeah, thought I'd surprise you." She laughed softly. "That's a nice surprise." He hesitated before speaking. "Lily, that man from last night, Ethan Miller, I found out something today." Her eyes brightened with curiosity. "What?" Richard took a breath. "Years ago, my company cancelled a contract with his small business. It destroyed him financially. He lost everything, including his wife." Lily's face fell. "Wait, you mean the man who made me smile again lost his wife because of us?" Richard nodded, his voice cracking. "Because of me, because I signed a paper I didn't bother to look twice at." Silence fell between them. Lily's gaze drifted toward the window, where city lights blinked like distant stars. "Dad, what are you going to do?" Richard stared into the distance. "I don't know, but I can't let it stay this way." The next morning, Ethan arrived for his usual shift, only to find a note waiting for him at the reception desk. "Mr. Miller, please report to conference room B at 10 a.m. R. Sterling." Confused, he arrived on time, expecting another conversation. But when he entered, he found not just Richard, but also the company's HR director and legal counsel. A projector flickered to life, displaying old contracts and payment records. Richard stood, voice heavy with remorse. "Mr. Miller, I discovered something that should have never happened. My company wronged you, I wronged you." Ethan blinked in shock. "Sir, I don't." Richard held up a hand. "Please, let me finish." He explained everything, the cancelled contract, the oversight, the unintended consequences. As he spoke, Ethan's face remained unreadable, but his eyes slowly filled with pain. When Richard finally stopped, the room fell silent except for the soft hum of the projector. Ethan took a breath. "Sir, I don't even know what to say." "Say you'll forgive me," Richard whispered. "Say you'll let me make it right." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You can't bring my wife back. You can't give Mia her mother. I spent years blaming the world and myself for what happened." But he paused, glancing toward the window. "If I hadn't lost everything, I wouldn't be here. And if I wasn't here, I wouldn't have met your daughter. Maybe that's what grace looks like." Richard felt his throat tighten. "You're a better man than I'll ever be." Ethan smiled sadly. "No, sir, I'm just a man who learned the hard way that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom." Tears welled in Richard's eyes, and for once he didn't hide them. "Then please, Mr. Miller, let me do something for you, for your daughter." Ethan hesitated. "What do you mean?" Richard smiled faintly. "A new start, something that honors the strength you've shown. You've been cleaning this building for 4 years, but after today, you'll never push that cart again." Ethan frowned. "Sir." "I want you to lead our new community outreach division," Richard said. "Help us support families like yours, the ones who fall through the cracks when business decisions go wrong." Ethan's eyes widened, disbelief flooding his face. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Richard said quietly, "and help me build something good out of all this pain." Tears finally spilled down Ethan's cheeks. "Yes, sir, I'd be honored." Richard stood and extended his hand. "No, Ethan, I'm honored." As their hands met, two men from different worlds shared something far greater than forgiveness. They shared redemption. And neither of them realized that the little girl watching from the hallway, Mia, had captured the entire moment on her phone, smiling through her tears. Because she knew what her dad didn't. The video would go viral. And the world was about to learn the story of the janitor who changed a billionaire's heart. The video began simply, shaky hands, a low murmur of voices, and the soft hum of an office projector. No one could have guessed that within 48 hours, it would sweep across the internet like wildfire. Mia had uploaded it quietly, without her father's permission, to a small YouTube channel she barely used. The title was simple but powerful. "My Dad, the Janitor, Who Made a CEO Cry." The thumbnail showed two men shaking hands, one in a crisp suit, the other in a faded uniform. The contrast was striking, the story behind it even more so. By morning, the video had over 3 million views. By the end of the week, it had surpassed 20 million. Everywhere, people were talking. On Twitter, users wrote things like, "This broke me, not all heroes wear capes, some wear janitor uniforms. A billionaire humbled by a man who lost everything because of him, poetic justice. Ethan Miller is the definition of grace, what a soul." Even major media outlets picked up the story. Morning talk shows debated it, news anchors replayed the footage, and bloggers flooded timelines with think pieces about humility, forgiveness, and the human heart. Ethan, of course, had no idea. He didn't even find out until Mia came running into their small apartment one evening, waving her phone. "Dad, Dad, you're famous." He laughed, scrubbing the kitchen counter. "Famous for what? My mopping skills." "No," she squealed, practically jumping up and down. "For this." She thrust the phone toward him. On the screen, he saw himself, sitting in that conference room, eyes wet, shaking hands with Richard Sterling. The video had subtitles and soft music in the background. The comments section was exploding with love and admiration. Ethan's heart dropped. "Mia, you filmed this?" She nodded nervously. "I just wanted people to see how good you are, Daddy. You always say kindness matters, but no one ever listens. I thought maybe they would this time." He stared at her for a long moment, torn between pride, fear, and disbelief. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't have." But before he could finish, his phone began buzzing non-stop. Calls, texts, unknown numbers, journalists, producers, even celebrities. Mia's grin widened. "See, everyone wants to talk to you." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "Oh boy." Across town, Richard was having a similar morning. Only his was filled with press requests, investors calling in shock, and his PR team frantically trying to manage the viral firestorm. "Sir," his assistant Susan said, barely hiding her smile, "your reputation just skyrocketed. People are calling you the CEO who cried. They love it." Richard groaned softly. "Not exactly the nickname I wanted." "But it's good press," she said, "and the community outreach initiative you launched, donations are flooding in, thousands, maybe millions." He exhaled slowly, glancing out the window. "It's good that something real came from this, but I don't care about the praise. I just want to make sure Ethan's okay." Within hours, Ethan was invited onto every talk show imaginable. Offers came pouring in, interviews, documentaries, even book deals, but he turned almost all of them down. He didn't want fame, he just wanted peace. Still, one invitation caught his eye: The Morning Perspective, a nationally televised program known for human interest stories. The host, a warm woman named Carla Jenkins, had personally requested Ethan and Richard to appear together. At first, Ethan refused. "I'm not comfortable with cameras," he said. But Mia pleaded with him. "Please, Daddy, people need to see what forgiveness looks like. You always tell me to share good things." He smiled gently, ruffling her hair. "You're too smart for your own good." So, reluctantly, he agreed. The next day, under the blinding studio lights, two men sat side by side on a sleek white couch, one in a tailored navy suit, the other in a simple gray shirt and jeans. The audience was silent, leaning in with anticipation. Carla smiled at them both. "Mr. Sterling, Mr. Miller, thank you for joining us." "Thank you for having us," Richard said calmly. Ethan nodded. "It's a bit strange being here, but I'm grateful." Carla leaned forward. "Millions of people watched your story and were moved to tears. Mr. Miller, let's start with you. How does it feel to know you've touched so many lives?" Ethan hesitated. "Honestly, overwhelming. I never set out to touch lives. I just wanted to be kind. The rest, it's grace." The audience murmured in admiration. Carla smiled. "And Mr. Sterling, what was going through your mind when you discovered your company had caused Mr. Miller's loss?" Richard sighed deeply, his voice low but steady. "Shame, regret, but also gratitude, because I realized something important. Wealth means nothing if you can't recognize the worth of another human being. Ethan didn't just forgive me, he reminded me what leadership should mean." Applause erupted, and Ethan looked down, humbled. Carla smiled gently. You both represent something rare, humility on one side, forgiveness on the other. Mr. Miller, if you could tell the world one thing, what would it be? He paused for a moment, eyes distant, then spoke softly. Pain will break you, but kindness, real, simple kindness, will rebuild you stronger. So don't hold back your heart. Someone out there needs it. The audience stood, clapping through tears. Cameras flashed. That clip alone became the most shared moment of the year. Across platforms, people quoted Ethan's words, tagging them with kindness rebuilds. Schools used the story in assemblies. Churches and non-profits cited it as a modern parable of grace. Even Richard's company transformed. Sterling Industries launched a nationwide program providing job opportunities for single parents, veterans, and the formerly incarcerated. Ethan became the public face of it, reluctantly at first, but eventually with pride. Lily Sterling, watching from home in her wheelchair, smiled through tears. Dad, she said softly, you didn't just change your company, you changed yourself. He looked at her, eyes glistening. No, sweetheart, he changed me. Meanwhile, Ethan returned home to a small but overflowing mailbox, letters, cards, gifts from strangers who had been inspired by his story. One letter stood out. It was from a young woman who wrote, I was going to give up, but then I saw your story. You reminded me that I still matter. Thank you. Ethan folded the letter gently, holding it to his heart. See, Mia, he said softly, that's what kindness does. It keeps people alive. Mia grinned, wrapping her arms around him. You're my hero, Daddy. He kissed the top of her head, whispering, I'm just a man who tried to dance. Outside, the world continued to spin, but for once, it spun a little softer, a little kinder. And while millions saw Ethan as a hero, he never saw himself that way. To him, he was just a janitor who chose love over bitterness, and in doing so, reminded an entire world that sometimes the smallest gesture can rewrite the biggest story. The story didn't just stay on screens or in headlines, it moved people. It crossed city lines, corporate walls, and even hearts that had long forgotten how to feel. What began as one dance between a janitor and a paralyzed girl became a quiet revolution of compassion that no one saw coming. Weeks after the viral moment, billboards across the city displayed Ethan's words in bold white letters. Pain breaks you, kindness rebuilds you. Schools began organizing kindness weeks. Churches, mosques, and temples shared sermons about forgiveness inspired by his story. Even rival CEOs, men who once prided themselves on being ruthless, began talking about the human side of success. Something deep within society had shifted. And at the heart of it, all was one man who still scrubbed floors when no one was looking. Ethan had accepted the position as head of Sterling Industries' new community outreach division, but he refused to let the title change who he was. He still wore the same simple clothes, still brought Mia to school every morning, still treated the janitors and cafeteria workers with the same warmth as always. When reporters asked why he hadn't upgraded his lifestyle, he smiled softly. Because peace doesn't come from how high you climb, it comes from who you lift while you're there. Those words became another viral quote, etched onto murals around the city. But the impact didn't stop with quotes. Richard Sterling himself had transformed, not just as a businessman, but as a man. Under Ethan's guidance, the company began hiring single parents, funding scholarships for underprivileged youth, and creating support programs for employees facing hardships. Richard personally visited the outreach centers every month, often arriving without warning. The first time he showed up unannounced at a shelter, he saw something that humbled him to his core. A teenage boy, no older than 16, was mopping the floor and humming softly. When Richard asked what brought him there, the boy smiled. I saw that video, sir, the one about the janitor who forgave you. I wanted to be like him. Richard couldn't find words. He simply nodded and whispered, you already are. Meanwhile, Lily had started volunteering at the same outreach centers. Her wheelchair didn't slow her down. If anything, it made her even more determined. She often told others that dance didn't heal my legs, it healed my heart. And she meant it. Her bond with Ethan and Mia had only grown stronger. Every weekend, they visited her for family dinners, something Richard encouraged wholeheartedly. Watching his daughter laugh again, surrounded by people who felt like home, filled him with a gratitude he could never express fully. One evening, as they all sat together sharing pizza, Lily looked at Ethan and asked, "Do you ever regret it, losing everything before all this happened?" Ethan smiled thoughtfully. "Sometimes I wish things had been easier, but if they were, I wouldn't have learned what really matters. Losing everything taught me to see everyone, even the ones the world ignores." Richard nodded quietly, "And it taught me to listen to the people I never noticed before." Mia grinned. "So basically, both of you needed to lose something to find everything." Everyone laughed, but there was truth in her innocence. Months passed, and the story continued to ripple outward. A local mayor invited Ethan and Richard to speak at a community event titled "The Power of Second Chances." Thousands gathered in the city square, waving handmade signs, "Be kind like Ethan, dance with someone who needs hope, forgive, don't forget." Standing on the stage, Ethan looked out at the massive crowd. He could hardly believe that so many people were there because of something as simple as a dance. Richard leaned toward him, whispering, "They're not here for me, you know. They're here because of you." Ethan shook his head. "No, sir, they're here because of her." He pointed toward Lily in the front row, smiling and waving, her wheelchair surrounded by children holding flowers. He stepped up to the microphone and spoke from the heart. "I used to think that pain made me less, that losing my business, my wife, everything meant my story was over, but it was just beginning. And when I met Lily, I realized that kindness isn't just a gesture, it's a bridge. It connects the broken parts of us, even when we come from different worlds. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this: forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it frees the future." The crowd roared in applause, but Ethan wasn't looking for cheers. He was looking for faces, faces of people who might have needed those words. He found them everywhere, in tears, in smiles, in the quiet nods of strangers who understood. Later that night, Richard sat alone in his office, long after the crowd had gone home. He looked at an old photo of his wife holding baby Lily and sighed softly. Then, glancing at the skyline, he whispered, "Thank you, Ethan." Because deep down he knew all his wealth, all his success, all his status, none of it had ever given him peace, but a single act of kindness had. Meanwhile, in their modest apartment, Ethan tucked Mia into bed. She looked up at him sleepily and asked, "Daddy, do you think Mom knows what you did?" Ethan smiled gently, brushing her hair from her forehead. "I think she knows, sweetheart. I think she's proud of both of us." Mia yawned, cuddling her teddy bear. "You think she saw the dance too?" Ethan chuckled softly. "Yeah, I think she did, and I think she was dancing right there with us." He turned off the lamp, leaving only the moonlight to fill the room. As he stepped out quietly, he glanced at the old photo of his late wife on the wall and whispered, "We did it, Anna. We finally made something beautiful out of the pain." The next morning, a letter arrived at Sterling Industries addressed to both Ethan and Richard. It was from a teacher in another state. Inside was a drawing from her students, a stick-figure janitor holding hands with a girl in a wheelchair, both smiling under the words, "Kindness wins." Beneath it, the teacher had written, "Your story taught my students that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they carry mops." When Richard showed the letter to Ethan, both men smiled, not the kind of smile that comes from pride, but from peace. "Seems like our little stories traveled far," Richard said quietly. Ethan nodded. "That's what kindness does, it keeps moving." Months later, the city honored Ethan Miller and Lily Sterling at a public ceremony. The mayor unveiled a new bronze sculpture in the park, two figures cast mid-dance, one standing, one sitting in a wheelchair. The plaque beneath it read, "Dedicated to those who remind us that compassion is the highest form of strength." As Ethan looked at the sculpture, Mia squeezed his hand. "Daddy, that's you." He smiled softly. "No, sweetheart, that's all of us, anyone who chooses love over pride." Lily rolled up beside him, tears in her eyes. "You changed the city, Ethan." He shook his head gently. "No, Lily, you did. You said yes to a dance." That night, as city lights shimmered across the water, the wind carried the faint echoes of music from a street musician nearby. A soft tune, the same song they had danced to months ago. Ethan looked toward Lily, smiled, and nodded. Without hesitation, she extended her hand again. And there, under the open sky, with people gathering around to watch, they danced once more, the janitor and the girl who refused to stop smiling, reminding everyone that redemption isn't a moment. It's a movement. The months that followed were quieter, yet somehow more powerful than any viral video or headline. The storm of media attention had faded, but what remained was something far deeper, a legacy built on humility, forgiveness, and human connection. Ethan's story was no longer about a janitor who danced with a CEO's paralyzed daughter. It had evolved into something larger, a movement that touched hearts across the world. Everywhere Ethan went, people recognized him, not with fame or fanfare, but with warmth. Mothers would stop him in grocery stores, tears in their eyes, thanking him for giving their children hope. High school students invited him to speak about perseverance. Even soldiers wrote to him, saying his courage and grace reminded them what they were fighting for. But Ethan never saw himself as a hero. He always said, "I just did what felt right." At Sterling Industries, the ripple effect of that moment was still growing. Richard Sterling's leadership had transformed beyond recognition. Meetings now began with a question he learned from Ethan: "How is everyone doing, really?" It seemed simple, yet it changed everything. Employees began opening up, sharing struggles they'd long hidden behind forced smiles. Productivity soared, but more importantly, trust returned. One morning, Richard walked into Ethan's modest office, though by now, Ethan's role was far beyond janitorial work. His title read Director of Community Development, but he still kept his old mop and bucket by the door. "Still keeping the tools of your trade, I see," Richard chuckled. Ethan smiled. "They remind me where I started and where most of our people are still standing." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "That's what makes you different, Ethan. You don't forget the floor you once cleaned." "Because the floor's what holds us all up," Ethan replied. They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that only people who have been through storms together can share. Later that week, a letter arrived from a local high school asking Ethan, Richard, and Lily to attend a charity gala. The theme: "One dance can change everything." The school wanted to raise money for disabled students and single-parent families, inspired entirely by their story. When they arrived, the gym was decorated with one read, "Kindness is contagious." Another simply said, "Forgive, dance, inspire." As Ethan and Mia walked in, students surrounded them with applause. Lily rolled in moments later, her face glowing with joy. She wore a flowing silver gown, elegant and graceful, her wheelchair adorned with twinkling lights. The principal took the microphone and said, "Tonight, we celebrate not just a story, but a choice, the choice to forgive, to love, and to rebuild. Because of this family, hundreds of students have found hope." Then the music started, the same melody that had once filled a sterile hospital room and changed their lives forever. Ethan turned to Lily, smiling softly. "Shall we?" Her eyes sparkled. "Always." The students watched as the two began to dance again, not for the cameras this time, not for redemption or recognition, but for joy. The lights reflected off their faces as they moved, slow and graceful, a living testament to what love and forgiveness can do. When the song ended, the entire gym erupted in applause. Tears streamed down faces young and old, but one person stood apart, a teenage boy in the corner, holding a camera. After the crowd settled, he approached Ethan nervously. "Sir," he said quietly, "my mom passed away last year. I haven't smiled since, but watching you dance tonight, I think I can try again." Ethan knelt down, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. That's all it takes, son. Just try again. One small step, that's how everything begins. Back at home that night, Ethan sat on the porch with Mia, watching the stars. The summer air was warm, filled with the sound of crickets and distant laughter. Daddy, Mia said softly, you think people will still remember you years from now? Ethan smiled, gazing at the sky. Maybe, maybe not, but that doesn't matter, sweetheart. Why not? Because I don't want them to remember me. I want them to remember what love can do. Mia leaned her head on his arm. I think they will. A gentle breeze passed, carrying with it the faint smell of roses, Anna's favorite scent. Ethan closed his eyes and smiled. Somewhere he felt she was smiling too. A year later, Sterling Industries hosted its first annual Heart of Humanity Awards, celebrating acts of compassion within the community. Richard insisted that the first honoree should be none other than Ethan Miller. When Ethan's name was called, the audience rose to their feet, clapping thunderously. Ethan walked to the stage, humble as ever, his eyes glistening. Truth is, he began, I didn't plan any of this. I just saw someone who needed a friend. But that's how change starts, with one small act that no one expects. He looked toward Lily and Richard in the front row, smiling. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing a person can do. It's the moment we stop letting our pain decide who we are. As the applause filled the hall, Richard found himself in tears, not out of guilt this time, but gratitude. Gratitude for a second chance, for his daughter's laughter, and for a man who'd taught him that dignity has nothing to do with status. After the ceremony, Richard approached Ethan. You know, you've done more for this company than I ever did. Ethan shook his head. No, Richard, you gave me the chance to show what second chances can do. You changed too, that's what matters. Richard extended his hand. Partners. Ethan smiled and clasped it firmly. Always. Months later, Lily's health began improving beyond what doctors believed possible. Through therapy, hope, and determination, she regained partial movement in her legs. The first time she took a few shaky steps, Richard and Ethan were there, holding her hands. Look, Dad, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm walking again. Richard's voice broke. No, sweetheart, you're flying. Ethan couldn't help but smile. See, told you miracles happen when you believe. The world had changed, but so had they. Lily went on to become an advocate for people with disabilities, starting a foundation called The Second Step, which offered therapy and emotional support to children across the country. Richard funded it entirely, but he always credited the inspiration to a janitor with a golden heart. And Ethan, he kept working quietly, helping communities, mentoring kids, and reminding everyone that greatness isn't measured by power, it's measured by love. Every year on the anniversary of that first dance, they gathered at the park under the statue that bore their likeness. People came from all over, janitors, teachers, CEOs, nurses, each carrying a candle. Together, they lit the night with hope. As the candles flickered, Ethan looked up at the sky and whispered, "We did it, Anna. We turned pain into purpose." And in that moment, the world felt a little brighter. As the final notes of their story settled into history, something beautiful lingered, a lesson that couldn't be contained in headlines, awards, or even the statue that now stood gleaming in the city park. It was something deeper, something timeless, a truth about humanity, compassion, and the power of forgiveness that would live on long after the cameras stopped rolling. Years had passed since that night when a single dance between a janitor and a paralyzed girl changed everything. The city that once thrived on competition had learned cooperation. Schools that used to celebrate only achievement now honored empathy. People had stopped rushing past janitors, waiters, and bus drivers. They started seeing them, acknowledging them with smiles and respect. And somewhere in the midst of it all, Ethan Miller continued to live simply, still sweeping floors in community centers, still helping strangers, still finding meaning in small things. He never grew tired of hearing how his story inspired others, but what touched him most were the quiet moments, like when a teenage boy stopped him in a grocery aisle and said, "My dad forgave my mom after watching your story." Or when a woman mailed him a photo of her wheelchair-bound daughter dancing at her school prom for the first time. Each message reminded him that kindness never truly ends. It multiplies. One crisp autumn evening, Ethan, Mia, Lily, and Richard sat together at their favorite park bench overlooking the city skyline. The statue of the dance stood nearby, bathed in the soft glow of sunset. Lily was older now, stronger. Her foundation, the second step, had become a beacon of hope for thousands. Richard had retired, handing the company reins to a new generation of compassionate leaders. And Mia, once a little girl full of questions, was now a bright young woman studying social work, inspired by the story that raised her. "Funny," Richard said with a chuckle, "how one dance changed all of this." Ethan smiled, his eyes soft. "Maybe it wasn't the dance, Richard. Maybe it was the choice to see someone as more than their pain." Lily added quietly, "Or the choice to believe that broken things can still be beautiful." Mia leaned forward, "Or maybe it was the choice to forgive." They all fell silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. The wind rustled through the trees as if nature itself was agreeing. Then Lily turned to Ethan. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't asked me to dance that night?" He thought for a moment and then said, "Sometimes. But then I realize life doesn't give us miracles, Lily. It gives us moments. We just have to be brave enough to take them." Richard nodded slowly, "And humble enough to learn from them." Ethan smiled, "Exactly." As night descended, city lights flickered to life below, thousands of glowing windows, each one holding its own story, its own pain, and its own chance for forgiveness. Lily looked up at the stars, whispering, "Mom used to say, when you heal one heart, you heal the world a little. I never really understood it until now." Ethan gazed at her thoughtfully. She was right. Healing doesn't start with big gestures. It starts when someone chooses love in a world that keeps offering anger. Mia added softly, "That's what you did, Dad. You chose love." Ethan's voice trembled slightly. "I just did what I hoped someone would do for me." The park was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, Ethan stood up and looked at the statue, the bronze figures of a man and a girl caught forever in a graceful spin. He placed a hand on the base of the sculpture and smiled. "Maybe we don't get to choose how our stories begin," he said softly, "but we do get to choose how they end." Lily wheeled closer, touching the statue beside him, "And we chose forgiveness." Richard placed his hand on both their shoulders, "And that's the greatest legacy any of us could ever leave." As the years rolled on, their story became more than a tale told online. It became a symbol of what's possible when pride gives way to compassion. Schools across the country added "the dance that changed a city" to their kindness curriculums. The phrase, "take the second step," became a popular motto in social media campaigns promoting empathy. And each year, on the anniversary of that first hospital dance, the city held a candlelight event. Thousands gathered, families, children, CEOs, janitors, all walking together down Main Street, holding candles and singing softly. It was called the Walk of Light. Ethan always led it, hand in hand with Lily and Mia. And as they walked beneath the city's glowing towers, he'd glance around at all the faces and think, "This is what redemption looks like." In time, when Ethan grew older and his steps slower, he passed his work to Mia. She continued his mission, traveling the world, spreading his message of compassion and second chances. Wherever she went, she carried a small locket containing a photo of her parents and one of Lily in her wheelchair. Inside was engraved Ethan's favorite quote: "Forgiveness doesn't change the past, it changes people." When asked about her father, Mia always said the same thing. "He wasn't a hero, he was a human who chose kindness, and that's what made him one." Years later, when Ethan's time came and the city gathered to honor him, Lily stood at the podium, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "He taught us all that love isn't something you wait for," she said. "It's something you give, even when the world gives you nothing back. He taught us that forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for yourself. because when you forgive, you set your own heart free. The crowd listened in silence, tears glistening under the soft glow of candlelight. When she finished, Mia stepped forward, holding her father's old janitor's badge. She placed it at the foot of the statue, the same one he once carried with pride. "This," she said, "is the symbol of a man who never forgot where he came from and who showed us where we could all go." The applause that followed wasn't loud or explosive. It was gentle, the kind of sound that feels like a prayer. And as the candles flickered across the park, a new generation of children ran around the statue, laughing and spinning, mimicking the pose of the bronze figures. Somewhere, it felt as though Ethan's laughter echoed with theirs, timeless, pure, and free. Final thoughts, narrator YouTuber voice. And that, my friends, is the story of how a single dance between a janitor and a paralyzed girl transformed not just lives, but an entire city. It's a story about forgiveness, about grace, and about remembering that every act of kindness matters, no matter how small. So I'll leave you with one question. What would you do if life gave you the chance to dance again? Would you take it? Would you forgive, love, and rise, even when it's hard? Because maybe, just maybe, your story could be the one that changes someone else's world. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching this powerful story here on Swift Tale. If this touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and drop a comment below about what forgiveness means to you. Your words could inspire someone who needs it today. Until next time, stay kind, stay